it's certainly my pleasure to introduce this guy. I met him 4 years ago, pretty much today, and he's got an interesting story to tell about his part in World War II. He was a bomber pilot. He's from New Jersey originally. He and I are members of the American Veterans Association in our hometown, Washington Township in New Jersey. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Marty Fleisher, my friend, World War II veteran. Marty?
Well, I see that I'm probably the oldest guy here. Nobody probably knows how old I am, but just to let you know, I'm 90 years old. I was 90 years old last month.
In other words, you celebrated your 45th for the second time.
True. Now, I came from a fairly large family. My father died when I was 6 years old, and as a result, my mother was left with three children, and 2 years after my father died, she married a widower with 3 children, and that made 6, and subsequently there were 2 more, so we were 8, and I was the oldest of the 8. And therefore I was like almost a father for the children, because my stepfather was in the wholesale produce business, and during the summer months he was hardly at home, because he went down to South Jersey to buy fruits and vegetables and come back to the farmer's market and stay all night to sell them. And the next morning went back down to South Jersey to buy some more. And that went on all week long. The only time we saw him was Fridays and Saturdays, and that was it. So it was all during the Depression, and it was pretty tough. Now when the war started, I was drafted, but I always wanted to be a pilot. And when the war came along, I tried to sign up for pilot training, but I didn't have any college education. At the time, they only accepted applicants or applications from anyone who had at least 2 years of college education or the equivalency of such. After boot training and so forth, they sent me to a airplane mechanics school at Keesler Airfield in Mississippi. And I went through airplane mechanics school there. I was usually a very bad student in high school. I hated school and I never wanted to go. But when I went to mechanics school at Keesler Air Force Base, I was second in the class of 300. After I graduated Keesler Air Force Base, they sent me to Glen L. Martin plant up in Baltimore, Maryland. And they were grooming me for crew chief. And I was to be a crew chief on a B-26. So they sent me to Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, waiting for assignment. And for some reason or another, 3 months went by and nothing happened. I didn't get any assignment, and I decided, well, I'm going to try for airplane training, for pilot training again. And this time, when I took the test, I passed it, and they sent me away to flying training. And finally, I went through all the training, and I graduated as a pilot October 1st of 1943. And then we moved almost within a week or two. We moved to Savannah, Georgia, where we received our airplanes. We were assigned to various squadrons and so forth, and we started our training there. We trained there, and then until February of 1944. We left the United States in February of '44, and we flew our own airplanes over to Europe. As it was a custom, during the winter months, they flew the airplanes on a southern route, which was across the Caribbean, and parts of South America, across the South Atlantic to Africa, and then from Africa up to England. And during the summer months, they sent them on a northerly route from across Greenland, across the North Atlantic to I don't know if they landed in Iceland, where they landed, but anyway, eventually in England. When we took the southern route, we had to leave from the easternmost part of South America, which was the town of Belém. And from there go to the Ascension Islands. Ascension Islands is an island in the middle of the Atlantic between Africa and South America. But first, of course, you cross the equator. Now, we didn't know it, but the equator was about 2 hours of flying time, flying blind. Of course, we were in clouds for 2 hours during that flight. Now, we never had anything like that. We had practiced instrument flying, but the thing is, never did it in real life. But this was the first test that we had. Now, we left Belém, and we had navigators assigned to us. Of course, we went with a short crew of only 4 people. The airplane normally carried 6 people. And when we had our briefing by the briefing officer, all the navigators complained, we're not going to make it to the Ascension Islands, because with their calculations, we wouldn't have enough fuel in order to get to the Ascension Islands, with all the fuel consumption and the rate of fuel consumption, the amount of fuel and so forth. And the briefing officer poo-pooed the whole thing, and he said, look, we've sent out thousands of airplanes already, and we haven't lost a one, so you can make it. So we get up and we start out, and we're up about 3 hours, and the estimated time was supposed to be probably about 7 hours or so. And we're up about 3 hours, and we had to try to transfer some fuel because we carried spare tanks, what they called Bombay Tanks, instead of bombs. We had 250 in one tank and 250 in another tank. Now, as soon as you use up some of the gasoline in your main tanks, you're supposed to transfer from the Bombays to the main tanks so that you can keep going, and then as your main tanks go down, you still add some more fuel from the Bombays, and you do that first before you take anything out of the auxiliary tanks, because we had four tanks in the wings. So as we're flying, and after about 3 hours, I start checking the fuel transfer system by checking the gauges. We had 6 gauges on a turntable. You turn the knob and you get 6 readings of 6 tanks. And something didn't seem right, so I called the engineer forward and told him that we don't seem to be getting all the gasoline in the tanks the way we were supposed to. And he took a look out of the window and he saw that all the gasoline was going into one auxiliary tank, which was full, so it was pouring out of the vent. So that was 250 gallons that we couldn't get out of one tank. How much of it we lost, I don't know, but we still couldn't get it out of that tank because that tank wasn't transferring properly. So we switched to the other tank, and the other tank was flowing properly and filling up the main tanks. So we couldn't decide whether we should return or continue going, because we were on the border of 50-50, which would be better. Well, because I was a mechanic and I knew a little bit more about the operation of the airplane, I started thinning back on the fuel-air mixture. And you have complete control of everything in the airplane. You had your control for your fuel-air mixture, you had control of your propeller pitch and the RPM and so forth. It's just like driving a car. When you go into 6th gear, you go to lower RPM, so you fly at 1850 RPM instead of the 2100, which you're supposed to fly at. At the same time, by pulling back on the fuel-air mixture, the engine starts to run with more air and less gasoline. And I kept pulling back on it until the engine would cough. And I wait a little while. And then I'd try another one. It'd sputter once or twice, and I'd left it that way. Until I felt it was safe enough to fly that way. We flew at 1850 RPM, just like putting it into 6th gear in a car. Well, when we got to the Ascension Islands, we called in and we asked if we could come in directly instead of flying an air pattern, which you normally have to fly before you land. So they said we could come right in. We went in. When they checked it all out, they found that one of the valves in our transfer system had stuck, and it wouldn't allow the proper transfer from that one Bombay tank. And as a result of what I did as far as thinning out the mixture and changing the RPM and so forth, we had more gasoline in our airplane than anybody else did. So, and it turned out it was an excellent lesson for us when we flew a couple of combat missions in particular.